Over in the pages of Marvel Comics' core Amazing Spider-Man series, Peter Parker was recently stabbed with a spear imbued with the sins of a goblin. This has really changed Peter's outlook and has caused him to explore a dark side over in the Marvel Universe. Peter has even been going after some of the recent villains over like Kraven the Hunter. This has really given the creative team the opportunity to remix elements of Kraven's Last Hunt over in the Amazing Spider Man franchise and flip the tables of your traditional Spider Man story by having Peter Parker as the aggressor. My name is Arako Braddock, and let's go ahead and see how our villains fare over in the pages of Amazing Spider Man Chapter 34. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to encourage you to support our channel by hitting the like button over on this video and subscribing to the channel. Spider-Man's hunt continues. Who is Peter's next victim? The penultimate chapter of a story you'll never forget. Amazing Spider-Man issue 34 is written over from Zeb Wells, featuring art from Patrick Gleason, colors from Marcio Menyz, and letters from VC's Joe Caramagna. In addition, we have a cover coming in over from John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. Really like how this cover teases the really villainous inflection over for Peter Parker across this particular arc over in Amazing Spider-Man. And I want to extend a quick thank you over to Adventures in Poor Taste and discuss some of the noir-tinged artwork coming in from Patrick Gleason over in The Amazing Spider-Man. Gleason is really one of my favorite artists over on this series, so getting the chance to see him depict a darker Spider-Man comic book is really thrilling. I particularly love this sequence that we have up on the screen, showcasing Norman interrupting what looks to be a date over between Mary Jane and her partner Paul. The way that Norman crashes the scene here and causes Mary Jane to sort of spill popcorn is captured so beautifully with the pencils from Patrick Gleason over in this comic book. Over on this next page, I really do think Patrick Gleason was able to capture some more great expressions over for Norman Osborn and Paul in particular. It really feels like Paul is really skeptical over towards Norman, and getting the chance to see Paul really kind of evoke some of these emotions in the context of this really tense Amazing Spider-Man story really got this issue off on the right foot for me. I particularly like how this page is designed, as it makes use of some of the white space in the panel borders and also features this really interesting panel bleed as well in this smaller panel over in the issue. And the way that it emphasizes Norman's face as he advises that both Paul and Mary take the tunnel in this sequence is also really thrilling. Patrick Gleason had some particularly interesting page layouts in this chapter of Amazing Spider-Man, focusing in on some really small panels that build the tension of the scene. We see this countless times in elements over with Kraven the Hunter in the comic book issue. The build-up over on this page that we have up on the screen, showcasing Norman turning on a light and having Peter just right behind him, is almost a jump scare over in the comic book issue. The way that author Zeb Wells has been able to evoke some horror in this particular storyline for the issue, I think is really thrilling, alongside what artist Patrick Gleason is able to bring over to some of these pages. Also, watching Peter undo some of the goodwill that he's fostered in his relationship with Norman with literal fists gives this issue such a tragic undertone here. I really do think Zeb Wells is having a lot of fun in subverting this traditional scenario that he's written throughout the Spider-Man run. And given the fact that there's a plot element that allows him to sort of explore what undoing this relationship would be like, I found this to be such a compelling storyline to take over in this series as a sort of what-if sequence over on the comic book page. I really love how this issue builds up the reveal over with what Queen Goblin is doing over in the comic book series. When we switch over to her, I found myself even more interested than usual due to how strong this particular issue is paced. I was also really impressed with how artist Patrick Gleason was able to render the page designs over with Paul and Mary Jane in the Holland Tunnel. It was really thrilling to see so many different plot threads in the issue coalesce in some of these pages too, as we return over to this black suit, goblin imbued Spider Man character who continues to haunt his ex partner Mary Jane and her current love interest Paul over in the comic book. Plus, the way that Zeb Wells continues to play off of Craven's last hunt in select scenes throughout this comic book is also a ton of fun. This creative team is juggling a lot of plot threads, but I really feel like the pages of Amazing Spider-Man 34 read really naturally throughout a lot of these individual scenarios. I also really like how Queen Goblin was implemented back into the cliffhanger for this comic book and hope that she gets to play an even bigger role in the course of the next issue here. So at the end of the day, I really do think Amazing Spider-Man 34 is another really fun and edgy chapter of this comic book issue. The way that Zeb Wells subverts some of these scenarios that he's built up throughout his run with Norman and Peter is a ton of fun to experience in this issue, despite just how tragic it is over for some of these select characters. I also really think we got a different side of what Patrick Gleason usually brings over to a comic book issue. The way that he laid some of these pages out with all this dark, negative space captured the really dark and dense element of this particular Amazing Spider-Man chapter. I'm also intrigued to see what Queen Goblin has up her sleeves for some of the final issues of this Amazing Spider-Man arc, and still think this book is in a really solid direction here. Before we go, I also wanted to touch on how strongly Zeb Wells has plotted some of these scripting sequences over in this comic book series. Really love how we got to return over to Randy and Janice, who recently experienced a botched wedding in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, getting to see how some of these plot elements set up the gang war and what some of the next incoming pieces are, I think, are absolutely thrilling. Really happy to see that Wells is continuing to utilize those plot elements as Amazing Spider-Man transitions from this dark Peter Parker story over to the upcoming gang war sequence. I want to know from you, did you enjoy Amazing Spider-Man issue 34 as much as I did? What do you think of Peter Parker's latest black suit era? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for coming to check out our review of this comic book issue, and we'll be back really soon to see the end of Peter Parker as a goblin-infused villain. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.